My pleasure and honor to introduce David Bryant, certainly subject matter expert in this field. Tremendous help, tremendous partner to us in Houston. We're thankful for that.
Thank you, Quincy. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Michael Bryant. I am the director of the Civil Rights Division. I am based in Austin. We have a staff of about 35, hopefully 38 people in the next month. But we're all based in Austin. We have a few staff that do everything from DBE outreach, hub outreach, hub and DBE compliance. We also administer the agency's ADA program, Title VI program, and we also do external EEO compliance as well. So it's a lot of things, but obviously the number one thing that we receive calls about, not just from business owners, but also from the state legislature, is about our DBE and hub programs. I don't know that we have a clicker, and it'll probably take me too long, and fortunately Gail used all the time that I wanted her to. Oh no, I'm being very thankful. I'm appreciative of that. Because I don't really do well with the sort of standard presentation. We created something for the PEPS conference last November. Two of our team members, Carlos Valderas, who's the agency's health coordinator, and Dave Tovar, who manages our DBE compliance, did a presentation that was really geared towards TxDOT staff and how we monitor contracts and professional services, importantly. And so while some of those things apply, to me, there are a lot of issues that people get confused about. And I just had a couple of quick questions. How many DBEs do we have in the room? Are there any DBEs that are not hubs? Okay, so we need to talk to you. Because obviously, as you heard from Gail, a lot of the professional services money is on the state side. So if you don't have your hub certification, you're not going to be eligible to do some of those things as a hub. You can certainly compete on your own, but take advantage of the programs for what they do. Something I can't say in the heavy construction arena is that you all are going to have certifications and qualifications, which we don't necessarily get to say on the heavy construction side. So a certification doesn't mean that you're guaranteed that when you meet a prime, they're going to say, oh, you're really good at what you do. Let me see your background and your bio and all those things. So we sort of pass a fundamental hurdle on the professional services side that we don't have to deal with, or that we don't get to deal with on the heavy construction side. I think Gail also mentioned that the aspirational goal that the comptroller provides for the professional services category is 23.7%. Last year, TxDOT hit about 34%. I think that was roughly $600 million that were listed in that category, and a little over $200 million was spent with hubs. And so it's really important, again, that you get your hub certification, and you can talk to me about that, because if you're already a DBE, we can process your application and get you certified a lot quicker than going through the normal process. On the DBE side, the state's required, or TxDOT's required, to submit different triennial goals to the various modal entities that we deal with primarily. So we have a goal with FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, a goal with the Federal Aviation Administration, and the most important one for TxDOT is the one with the Federal Highway Administration. We submitted that goal in 2016, and the current 3-year goal for the state is 12.6%. And so what makes that different on our federal projects, where the DBE is going to be required, we actually set individual contract goals all the time. And even if you see a goal set at 0, there's a reason for it. It doesn't really happen on the professional services side, because again, there isn't as much, and some of the professional services side is wrapped into our design build projects. So if you, as much as we've sort of segregated these programs, I think the one in 3 weeks is for heavy construction. I know we have some folks here from Alameda Genoa who are handling our 288 project, which hopefully still may have some design opportunities, limited. So just raise your hand real quick. So you should talk to them about the 288 project. And also we have the 249 project here with Williams Brothers, and State Highway 99, Grand Parkway, H&I with Barovia. And so there are opportunities as those two projects get ramped up for professional services firms to be involved. And because they're design build, there are opportunities throughout the life of the project as needs dictate. And I guess I should have also thanked Commissioner Ryan. I know she had to leave, but I would like to stress that those of you from Houston had an advocate on the Texas Transportation Commission. We now essentially have a standing meeting every month, which we don't always end up having, but she is very interested in, again, where we are with our numbers, what we're doing from an outreach perspective, and what we can do to help businesses. And I know there was a question earlier that we sort of addressed really quickly about set-aside programs, and the Civil Rights Division has advocated for a set-aside program for small businesses only. Very broadly, hadn't really gotten into all the specifics, but we were told by General Counsel at TxDOT that we couldn't do it because of, as Dan I think pointed out, the government code currently restricts us in how we can award contracts in the different areas. So we're still working on that to see if there are some ways to get around some of those issues, and seeing what we can do, because there are other states that do that. The issue of small businesses competing with each other, and I think I had a conversation in the back before it came up here, is that when you put money on the table, all firms want to eat. Everybody's going to try to eat. The big firms have young associates, new employees that they need to try out on some of these smaller projects before they get tied into some of the bigger projects. So we recognize that, and the only way that we feel that we can, or not the only way, but one of the ways that we feel we can help grow small businesses and increase the participation will be with some sort of program that allows small businesses to compete against small businesses. That will ultimately require legislative approval. We don't know what will happen with that next session when it starts in January, but that's something that we are at least putting on the table. And as Quincy and everyone has mentioned, we are open to any ideas because you know, we don't claim to know it all. I've been in my position for 3 years, and we've seen some improvement in our numbers. I would love to take all the credit for that. Last year we were at about $877 million out of the just over $8 billion spending that we did. Last year was spent with DBEs and hubs, so we were just over 10%, I think around 12 or 13%. But we are still trying to figure out ways to get that number higher. And with our DBE goal of 12.6 across the state, a lot of that is being impacted by the professional services and all the great work that the PEPS team is doing. We are seeing an increase when we did our goal methodology. I think for the first time, about a little more than 10% of the calculation in coming up with that goal involved professional services contracts. So it's a huge area, not just by the dollar value, but an important area as TxDOT continues to grow and meet some of the stuff that Quincy sort of read through that presentation that wasn't working with the audio. You know, the next 10 years are really important. If you don't pay attention to the Unified Transportation Program, you should see where projects are coming. Not just those that are already scheduled for delivery, but also those that are planned for delivery. And make sure you provide input to the districts, whether you work with the Houston district, if you're a little bit to the east and you can work in the Beaumont district, south to Yoakum, north to Bryan, Lufkin. The great thing about professional services providers is also that you can compete across the state. One of the big issues when I asked my staff what I should talk about from a DBE compliance standpoint or even a hub compliance standpoint was we have to do CUFs on DBE firms, so a commercially useful function that you perform, that you manage, that you supervise the work that you've been contracted to do. For professional services, it's a lot easier than the guy who has to have a paving truck or some other piece of large equipment. Most of the professional reviews are going to be done by desk audit. So we're looking at, in the future, potentially adding some Skype issues so people can just make sure you're in an office. But again, you know, you have the ability, as long as you've got your computer and the right software, you can probably do your work anywhere in the world at any given time. And as long as you can travel to the particular projects when necessary, you can do that work. One other thing that I wanted to point out, and I wanted to run this by Dan before I brought it up, is there's been questions in the past about the work authorization process with professional services contracts. We've had some providers who have said, yes, I got a contract, but I think I'm on work authorization 4 or 5. And ultimately there's a responsibility for TxDOT to try to work through those work authorizations. It doesn't always happen that we get to 4 or 5. And so I think PEPS and Dan, if you want to just address it briefly, has been working to try to make sure that when we look at goals, we don't want to see hubs or DBEs stuck on those last work authorizations as if that's the only way they're going to get work. Sometimes it's for specializations and things like that, but those goals really apply to the entire contract, not to the specific work authorization. And so I don't know, Dan, if you just wanted to address.
Sure, thank you. One of the things that we're doing is whenever a work authorization is issued, we have an opportunity to take a look at it. What we're doing is if we don't see that the prime provider is trying to utilize all of their sub-providers, especially Hub DBE sub-providers, to full utilization, we're pushing back. Meaning, we have seen prime providers try to suck up the full amount of the work authorization to perform the work themselves. We're pushing back. We're saying that's not acceptable. I think we've all heard the term "come to Jesus." There are some prime providers who have had the term "come to Martin" conversation. Those are, Martin Roden is our division director, and he has asked for a meeting with some of the prime providers in certain situations, where he pointedly asks them, how come we're on work authorization number X, and we're not seeing you meeting your goal, or even looking like you're attempting to meet your goal. So we are pushing back and telling folks this is no longer acceptable. We will expect you to be using your sub-providers, Hub DBE sub-providers. And if you don't feel that that's happening, just let us know. And we may have another come to Martin meeting with some prime provider. So with that, any questions on that before I turn it back over to Mike? Okay.
One other issue we've seen recently has been the use of joint ventures. And again, when I bring up some of these issues, it's often an internal TxDOT issue where we're fighting with contract services, or at least I fought with contract services. We've had issues where we've seen DBEs or hubs join and become part of a joint venture with a much larger firm. The issue becomes doing those joint ventures is great on one level, but it actually can be a barrier for the participation of that DBE or hub firm. Because what happens is, and I skipped through the slides, and if anybody has a question about the termination or substitution, we can talk about that. But the issue becomes, we had a particular DBE hub in the Dallas area that was part of a joint venture. They were going to be used for about 10% credit. The joint venture had 2 other DBEs, and I think the total was about 23–24% utilization, which was above whatever the goal that was set. But because of the joint venture, there were other rules and things that were outside of the scope of our compliance reviews or any of our processes, because in that joint venture, a separate legal document, a separate legal entity, the DBEs had agreed to certain things. And while we would have opposed someone signing that, they were removed from the project outside of the normal termination substitution requirements, and it was because of that separate agreement. My personal recommendation, and this is just me as a individual, if I were going to form a joint venture with a company much larger than me, and I knew they were going to use me to, in the hub subcontracting plan, for instance, once, as I think we talked about, as you could self-perform as the hub entity. So they had enough credit to satisfy the goal so they could self-perform because of this joint venture entity. But again, by losing that power, we couldn't do anything for them once they were removed from the project. So I would suggest that if you're ever going to be in a joint venture, and obviously it's unlikely if you're a company of a certain size that you're going to get on as a joint venture to become the majority owner or majority partner in that joint venture, but you want to have control if you're a DBE or a hub, because there's no value to you, in my opinion, to just be another member of a joint venture where you're agreeing to a lot of things. Professional services, we don't see it as much in terms of people not reading their contracts, but sometimes because of the TxDOT experience, we've seen people who we feel have rushed into signing a contract because they're just happy to get the work finally. And no matter what speed you get that work, you've got to make sure you read your contracts. You've got to make sure you're doing your due diligence the same way you got through school, you got to your certification, you've taken all those tests. You've got to do your due diligence to make sure that your rights are protected legally by contract, and then also legally by the requirements of either the DBE or HUB program. And we don't want anyone, and Dan, you have a question or a comment?
I had a comment. Thank you, sir.
We should have done this together.
Yes, sir. Sometime back, we put a language in our RFQ that says we're not accepting joint ventures or joint responses. So we've just pushed that aside. Prime is a prime. We're accepting one prime and not joint ventures or joint responses, partly due to this issue.
And before I forget, I want to also introduce a few people in the room. Tico, who is with Impact Strategies, who is the managing the Alliance program contract here in the Houston district. You just wave your hand real quick. There's been some feeling that the Alliance program is primarily geared towards heavy construction, but it's also geared towards professional services. If you feel like there's something that TxDOT can do to help your business grow, please talk to Tico. She can walk you through some of the requirements of the program. There's an application process, there's a needs assessment, really to identify specific training. And again, training that's geared towards professional services is often going to be very different than what we do for some of the heavy construction firms. I also want to introduce Aisa Showery, who is new to the Civil Rights Division. She's one of our outreach specialists, and she will be working with the PEPS Division on sort of continued outreach similar to this, and continuing some of the previous quarterly meetings that the PEPS Division was holding, sort of tied to the wave, but also looking to create some small groups in some of our larger areas. Roughly 75% of all the DBEs that are in the TUCP directory are based in the 5 major metro areas, so Austin, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth. So there's a lot of work that can be done in those areas. We've also suggested to some people that I've met and some in this room that I've met before, is as you start to grow, is look to some of your peers in some of these other local areas. While we may not do joint ventures the way that Dan and I just talked about, there are opportunities for small businesses to get together. And I think we often fail to utilize those resources when we come to these events and we look to network with the giant firms and that are members of ACEC or AGC, but we also forget to network with each other sometimes. Sometimes you guys are each other's best resources, and please don't forget that, because often you can create that next large business that can work together and work with TxDOT. I also want to mention, last week there was a public meeting held for the TxDOT disparity study, which is going to look at our next FHWA goal submission for 2019. Our provider or consultant for that study is Colette Holton Associates. Some of you may be familiar with her because she is currently finishing up the City of Houston disparity study. They are collecting a bunch of financial data and contract data from TxDOT currently. When they complete that process, hopefully sometime this summer, early fall, they will be reaching out to business owners of all sizes, types, to collect anecdotal data and other information to address whether or not our goal that's currently 12.6 will stay at 12.6. It may go up a little bit, it may go down, but we also want to make sure that all types of business owners that are receiving TxDOT dollars are participants in that, because again, I think the ultimate goal of the process, although some people don't agree with this, is that we go to a point where we have 0 goals, which would mean that everyone who wants to participate on a TxDOT contract has that opportunity without barriers, without discrimination, without harassment. And so that's a work in progress. I certainly don't think we're going to get there next year, but there are a few states across the country that are at that goal where they only set race-neutral goals, or race and gender-neutral goals. So really, what I want to do now is just open up if there are any questions about what the Civil Rights Division does or the DBE and HUB programs. And otherwise, Raquel, you can have some of your time back. Yes, sir.
How are DBE goals determined? Say, for instance, the one that I'm working on, a solicitation is 13%. Why is it not 50 or 60%? So how is that determined?
So each contract goal is going to be determined individually. So you're going to look at sort of the totality of things. So you're going to look at what subcontracting opportunities are identified, what historically on those type of projects, I don't know what type of service you're providing, but depending on that contract, we'll look at other contracts that have been let in the past or awarded in the past. We'll also look at the local area. Again, if it's professional services contracts, the base of looking at the DBE or hub participation is much broader, because again, as professional service providers, you can generally do some of that work regardless of your individual location. Whereas on a heavy construction project, we may limit the radius to about 200 miles in terms of what we think is going to happen. So it really goes into all those things, and probably a few more that I haven't said, but if you have a follow-up to that.
So that could be in a way an inroads is to increase the DBE goal.
And we are under discussion, because we certainly get that as a point of contention with legislators, at least on certain projects, but trying to identify that and not oversaturate, because we also look at, you know, how much work is going on in that particular area. Again, I say this a lot more because it's more geared towards heavy construction. Professional services, again, because it's the hub program, some of those, you know, it's really that aspirational goal. And again, we've been exceeding the goals. Is it enough for a particular group or not? Because we aren't able to set individual subgroups of those certification classes. So it really covers everybody. So sometimes you may see a certain group and may have a higher number than another, and we aren't able to adjust based on those particular categories in that group. Yes, sir. Did you have a question? Or? In terms of the certification, or?
Is the federal DBE the same as state DBE?
There is no state DBE. Our state program is the hub program, so that's one clarification. But the big thing for the hub program is that you're a Texas resident and your company's based in Texas. So we have, of the 4,300 DBEs in Texas that are certified to do business here, we have about 3,600 that are Texas based, and most of those we are working to try to get them hub certified if they aren't already. The federal program also has a lower threshold for gross revenues for your company. That's about $24 million as the cap, and the hub program is about $34 million. Any other questions? Concerns?
On design build projects, is it possible to put a different percentage for construction and then one for professional services?
I think we've done that in the past, and I think there were mixed results, and I think we're looking at it again on some of the upcoming projects that will be awarded during this fiscal year and then next year. So we're reviewing it to see if we can make a difference, but again, because of the size of those projects, there are different concerns both ways, but Quincy, if you have anything to add.
Thank you, David. We are looking at, just like you said, because the other thing that we look at is that the percentage of construction tends to be quite a bit larger than design, so we're trying to do a weighted deal. We're looking at different things. We haven't come to the decision yet on 45. Yes. Now, hang on. If you need David, I'll give you the mic.
Either one of you. A lot of times on the design services, when you have the DBE goals set at the 12.8%, you end up with the field services, and they don't necessarily care to include other engineering firms. Is there any way that you can separate that out? You know, because a lot of times the promise fill that up with geotechnical survey and SUE, and then they don't have any need to include engineering firms.
All right, you just blew my circuit. Write that down. Let's take a look at it.
I think we've looked at that. I mean, I think, you know, when we look at what large companies are subcontracting, or at least subcontracting with DBEs or hubs, we're trying to determine if there's a real focus or if there's a way we can expand that. So I think it's another thing that's under review to try to determine, can we go a little deeper in terms of how we identify those opportunities, not just with what the primes may identify, but also what we identify up front. But a lot of that's is still looking at historical performance and where those opportunities have been in the past, and if there are other opportunities that we can add on.
Two questions. Number one is,
I know that the hub goal is like 23.7, and typically DBE percentage change is 12%, 30%. I mean, I think you may have answered, I missed it. I mean, what is preventing it to make it bigger? Is there a law or something that you cannot make it similar like the hub, like 23%?
Again, we go through a process of setting those goals. Again, because the pool for professional services allows us to offer some higher goals on the professional services side, whereas on the heavy construction side, we're a little more limited based on the ability of those firms to move around. Whereas again, the professional services, that pool can be statewide for any particular contract.
And I know these numbers always change, like the small business numbers and everything. So what is the current limit for the hub and for the DB? Is it like yearly business revenue, the number that you mentioned?
Yeah, there's a gross revenue amount, and I think the cap on the hub program is about 34 million, and it's about 24 million on the DBE program. And it's averaged over, for the DBE program, over 3 years, and it'll be assessed on your hub certification, which you have to renew every 4 years. Any other questions before I turn it over? Thank you all very much.